All right. And the question we always ask, can you see my screen?
Yes, I
I will
can,
take it as
Bas.
a yes. All right. We have to ask these days. So, well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, all of you, whether you are joining live or watching this recording. So, welcome to the 10th installment of the Microlearning Conference, if you can believe it. And it is really a pleasure and an honor, really, to be part of this fantastic event and a milestone. So, before I kick things off with my session, a little bit about myself. Maybe some people have seen me before in the chat, making some smart-ass comments here and there. So my name is Bas Debbink. If you're not familiar with the name, it's Dutch, so you would know that if you know other people in Holland or are from Holland itself. I was born and raised in Holland. I moved to the United States in 1995. So put a few things that are very Dutch in the picture. I actually visited Holland for the first time since the pandemic in April of this year. So on the bottom left there, I couldn't find a more Dutch picture. You kind of have the trifecta of all things Dutch. You have the tulips, the windmill, and the wooden shoes. The picture at the top is the town of Nijmegen. Again, don't try and mimic that unless you're from Holland, which is where I went to college. I have been with Johnson & Johnson for 18 years. I'm currently a learning and development leader. I started in information security, as it was known back then, because back then information needed securing, not cyber. I don't even know what that means anyway. But I've made my way through Johnson & Johnson in a few different roles and ended up in a learning and development role after taking on a compliance training role in sales training, corporate training, and I really found my passion there because I really enjoy developing people. Outside of work, I am a certified Tai Chi instructor. So no, it is not just for old people in the park. It does involve sharp objects, as you can see in that bottom picture there. So I've been doing that for about 13 years, and I've been teaching for about 7. So let's jump in. Microlearning secrets at Johnson & Johnson or really anywhere else, because it really isn't company specific or industry specific or location specific. Even though what I'll talk about will, in some cases, be more or less meaningful depending on what type of industry you work. But I'm going to try and make this as agnostic as possible. So first of all, the secret. You may remember Po's father in Kung Fu Panda and his secret sauce. So there is no secret. And I know I can hear kind of the disappointment coming through here, but it's really true. There is no secret. It's just some down and dirty hard work to make sure that microlearning is successful in your organization or to make it successful in another organization. Maybe you got hired to consult or help a team implement microlearning. So I'll go through how to make that happen. Now, of course, the hardest and most important work is communication. So communicate, and then communicate some more, especially if you're embedded in a legacy learning culture. Changing the way that learners are forced to, or maybe not forced to, but hopefully asked to consume content and retain it without a proper running start is most likely not going to end well. So that's the what. It's simple, right? It really isn't. So let's dig into a little bit on how to do this. Now, I imagine most of you have heard of learning in the flow of work or taking training where people are already spending time. Well, even at work, they're not always working. So jump on them when and where they least expect it, like the Spanish Inquisition. So this is for you Monty Python fans out there. People have to wait for an elevator, throw a QR code on the door. They go to lunch. The cafeteria is a prime location to advertise your microlearning content. If you have a cafeteria where they take orders, they can learn something while they wait for their order to be ready. Why would you want to talk to these strangers in the office that you haven't seen in years when you could actually learn something? If you have a group of frontline learners, like a sales force, and who spend a lot of time in waiting rooms, and I realize that maybe more pharmaceutical or medical device related, they could brush up on their selling skills while they wait. Or maybe that's a good time to take that pesky compliance training that's been on their to-do list for many years, well, hopefully not years, but certainly several weeks, and they get the nasty grams from their managers because they can't be bothered during happy hour to take that training. So really think of different ways in which this learning in the flow of work applies, especially with the increase in the return to office mandates. Now, as we've all heard from these industry geniuses, home-based workers are bumming off all the time. So they've got plenty of time to learn. And again, they can take training anytime. And of course, that's a joke, but think of ways to have them see training using microlearning as a welcome break from the endless Zoom calls. Or when you're on a Zoom call, pop in a link to a microlearning piece of content in the chat and have them actually learn something interesting instead of just listening to a conversation that they have no input into anyway. So here's an example of some change management that I adopted recently in my office. So we have plasma screens on most floors in our office, and I put this catchy title and a teaser paragraph on the display. We had the QR code leading directly to the microlearning course, because as soon as people get up from their desk, their phone magically appears in their hand. So you've already got them there. So they'll scan in the QR code, get learned to your content management or your learning experience system, and then they can take some micro-learning training. And Christopher, you'll probably appreciate this because I know you're a metalhead like I am. The 2 minutes to knowledge is completely based on 2 minutes to midnight by Iron Maiden. But in addition to that, use those micro-learning tools in other ways. Use them as announcements. You have a big event coming up, put a piece of content together that shows why people would want to go to that event. And then after the event, create a summary using those same tools. Remember when I first started, I said not to jump straight into a new learning modality. Have the people get used to seeing the solution in other areas. Yes, I understand microlearning is supposed to be completely intuitive, and for the most part, that is true. But I know we're a bunch of learning professionals here. How often have you heard is, we don't need training because our new platform or software is so intuitive, right? You know what I'm talking about. So if you have training sessions already planned or you're trying to show training effectiveness, use this microlearning tool to create pre and post-session assessments, and leadership will love you. You're always asked, show me that this is impactful. Well, you can use these microlearning tools just to add to the existing training sessions with these pre and post assessments. So again, I'll keep this brief because I love to engage in some conversation afterwards. Just want to reiterate, familiarity will lead to consistency. And more importantly, it will lead to results. So if you're working with teams who are still in the old lunch and learn modes, and right now with the more in-office, face-to-face meetings and training happening, this will continue to be a thing. But if these SMEs approach you to help them with their training materials, say, sure, I'm glad to help, but you have to include a micro-learning piece or two in addition to those double-digit number of slides that they want to go over. And it's actually really a good way to teach them good slide etiquette, because you can challenge them by asking, what is the learner supposed to learn on this slide? And if they can't summarize their content into a microlearning course, it is too verbose. And with that, that is all I had to share today. So thank you for sticking around. It's time to learn a little bit from the real experts here, and have a great rest of the day, everyone. I'll be here for the rest of the conference. If you have questions, ping me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Bas Debbink there. Trust me, I've looked. And thank you.
Awesome. Well, Bas, I'm gonna you get to chat with me now for a few extra minutes, because I think not only have you probably been one of the most loyal participants to this, but you may have been the most concise presentation we've had, which actually is awesome, because then we have time to sit and chit chat on here. So anyway, by the way, unrelated to your topic, I still remember we did you were on Learning Tech Talks with me. Do you remember that episode?
Yes. Oh yeah. The infamous phrase, when a vendor says it's on the roadmap, that means no.
I know. Yes, it's still there. Well, I first of all, love the fact that one of the points you brought up was really focusing on making sure you're communicating with people when you're making these changes, because I know just from experience, it's so easy to assume. And I think sometimes as a leader, sometimes it's easy to, because you're involved in the changes before they happen. So by the time it actually happens, you're on a different end of the change curve and going like, yeah, I don't have time to think about that. But so many people are so early on. So is this part of something that, yes, you're doing from a learning standpoint, but is it also integrated into some of your communication and change strategy?
Yeah, for sure. That's why I pointed out, like, look for these other avenues of using those tools. The more that people see it, the easier they'll fall into it, and the more quickly they're likely to adopt it. So when probably read on LinkedIn, we had our Johnson and Johnson Learning Day very recently. So Johnson and
Yeah.
Johnson gave our employees 8 hours last week Friday to spend just learning. And for our organization, I put together a little piece of micro-learning content and said, like, here are the recommendations from our CEO, here are the recommendations from our CIO, and here's some recommendations that are more specific to our organization.
Okay.
That's,
so I'm actually really interested in that, because I'm curious how that worked with that related to microlearning. And I like the fact you got the leadership involved in helping give some context for where people could start. And I think there's this fine line of, you can be draconian and say, it's learning day, you must learn this.
Right.
But then you can also go the other way where you go, just learn. And that's almost too ambiguous for some folks to go, I don't even know where to start with that. So it sounds like you kind of hit that middle ground with that and gave some people some options on what they might do without saying, and you must do it this way.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's great that we have access to a lot of these learning resources, but and I keep bringing up this analogy, when you point people to a large learning management system or a learning experience system and say, all right, here's all the learning that you could possibly want, knock yourself out. It's like throwing them in the ocean without a vest or some kind of flotation device, and not even tell them which way land is. They're just going to kind of float around and trying to figure out what it is that they need to do. So yes, choice is great, but some guidance will certainly get them on the right path without being too prescriptive or draconic.
Well, because at the end of the day, I think it's easy to forget when you're in our industry. Like, we're in the profession of learning. So normally we're not having difficulty figuring out, like, what could we be doing to learn? But the average person is not thinking about their own personal growth and development the same way we are. They may be thinking about it a little more abstractly, but not necessarily, I should do this, 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 and this. So I am curious on this, and I'm watching questions too. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to chime them in. I'm trying to watch things as they come in. But with this, with your balance, and I'm curious your take on this, on the learning in the flow versus out of the flow. I like the fact that you call that out, because I know Burson's not here and he and I go back and forth sometimes, but he said learning in the flow is everything, or it should be. And I actually don't agree with that, because I think, yes, there's room to do more of that, but there is also this opportunity to say, sometimes you need to actually take people when they're not distracted with their work. Right. Where do you find that balance?
Yeah, no, and one of the major things we hear all the time is people just don't have time for learning. So if you're going to now disrupt their work, it's going to breed even more.
We're going to annoy them.
Learning and development space, right? Yeah, I was walking around with a target on my back. So that's why I kind of said, like, look, think of ways that you can engage the learners when they're at work, whether that's office or home, but not actually working. We have this great ordering system in our cafeteria where they have these plasma screens, and you have the number of your order, and it's red, yellow, or green, whether they're working on it or it's like, put a QR code there, and people are just staring at the screen waiting for their order to be ready. I'm like, they can use that time much more wisely.
Okay. And do you find people are engaging with that kind of stuff? Like, again, if you're smart about it.
Right. Yeah. We're starting to see some uptick. The plasma screen, the 2 minutes to knowledge. People are finally starting to say, like, hey, we saw that, and we followed that link, and it took us there, and we really like it. We're kind of in a pilot mode right now, just to see if that is the right approach. Also with a big company like we are. We can't put it in all our buildings. We're doing very specifically based on the organization that I'm part of, and we all sit more or less on the same floor, so it's very confined. But that's a good pilot. We're a technology organization.
Well, and it sounds like you're going into it with reasonable expectations, which I think is an important part, because sometimes we go into this going, we hope 90% of people do. And it's like 90% of people don't care.
No,
It's like
no,
unreasonable to think when
no,
people
no.
are going to lunch, 90% of people are going, you know what I want to do right now? Learn something new. But going into it a little bit and going, are we starting to get traction? Are we seeing more people adopt? Because also going back to your points on change management takes time. It's not something you flip a switch and everybody's doing it. It takes, I mean, I just even think of the history of building my live stream and how much time it took before even people knew what it was. And that's not something that happens overnight. And the same is true with learning. And I imagine a company the size of J&J, you're wrestling with that in spades.
Yeah, no doubt. Again, the Global Learn Day that we just had, that was announced, weeks in advance, and a lot of leadership engagement. So I'll be curious to see what the actual metrics are going to say at the end of that. But yeah, sir, I'm certainly not expecting 80% of people actually taking advantage of that, because again, it's not built in yet that learning new skills or upskilling or reskilling needs to be part of their career journey here.
Okay. Well, and one of the questions, the last one I will ask on this one from Ellie, is in terms of, so we're talking about some of this in terms of like the measurement of it.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you're looking at to go, is this effective, as we're thinking about maybe changing the culture or getting people more engaged in that kind of bite-sized snackable learning?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways. So for this particular pilot with the plasma screens, I'm just looking at the number of people who actually open and complete that course.
Okay.
The very basic ways of measuring. Then our next step would be to actually stop people while they're waiting and say like, hey, did you see this? And do you remember this particular piece? Really going to see if they actually retained the knowledge that they learned. We are suffering from a severe case of survey fatigue. So we'd like to keep that to a minimum. So we're looking in different ways. And that's why I brought up kind of the pre and post assessment. Measuring training effectiveness has always been challenging. So doing a pre and post training assessment using a microlearning tool is a really great way to prove that the microlearning piece works, but also your training effectiveness in these longer session works.
Okay. All right. Well, Bas, first of all, everybody, Bas, thank you so much for being here. Everybody, can we get some rounds of emojis for Bas's contributions to this? I will tell you right now, Bas, you have way more questions in the Q&A than we probably would have filled up the rest of the afternoon.
All right.
If I were to try and go through all these, which is a good thing.
But
that and on, well, actually that's true. You can see it, so you can go through it. And then on top of it, you did open yourself up to say you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
so
of course.
Careful what you wish for. I will just tell you that right now. But for folks who are watching and go, I have some questions for Bas on how that's going, or some of these specific ones like the different questions or the QR codes or how you're picking that up, feel free to follow up. And Bas, I know you'll be here because you're an active participant.
I'll be here.
And you'll probably handle
I love talking this topic with people. So I learn all the time.